Hey everybody, this is Jonathan Schrantz, and today we're going to continue our coverage of the Steinitz Variation. We're going to be looking at some pretty crazy lines. There's lines where I think white in these kinds of positions are trying to play for positional advantages, but we do have ways to make it sharp, make it entertaining, and keep white on his toes. I hope you enjoy. Today we're going to be taking a look at the position after e4, e6, d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, and after e5, knight f to d7. We've had a look already in part 1 at the move f4, so if you haven't seen it, make sure you go back and check out f4. f4 is definitely the most typical move here for whites. You're going to see that most of the time. But today we are going to focus on the move knight c to e2. And this is a very, very interesting attempt by white. And this is really theory dense, so I think a lot of people are only going to play this if they really want to book up and come up with something good. But this has been made famous between the matches between Shirov and Anand, where Anand famously won a lot of good games with white, so people do have that in their back of their mind. Anand has a very good success rate with this as white, so we must take it as a very respectable way of playing. Indeed, it is probably one of the better ways for white to try to get an advantage against the French, so we're going to have to be very careful when we play against this one. White's big idea is pretty simple. He's going to play c3, he's going to play f4, he's going to bring the other knight out, and he's just going to say, I have a huge amount of space, and if black is unable to do anything about it, white is going to crush black. And this is one of the things that people fear. I don't want to play the French because white's going to get a huge amount of space, I'm going to get crushed, I'm not going to be able to move my pieces. So black does have to act quickly, and the way to combat white's aggressive attempt at trying to get this huge center is to immediately attack the center. Moves like c5 and f6 need to come very quickly, and in a lot of cases the queen will go to b6. We're trying to get a lot of pressure, and we're going to be looking for sacrifices along some of these, the pawn chain here. There's going to be some sacks on e5 we're going to take a look at, and some ideas of putting a lot of pressure on the d4 pawn. That being said, white has wasted a lot of time here. So the way to do that is to get the stuff out as fast as possible, and the most logical move, of course, for black is to play the move c5. Directly attack the center. White is going to play c3, and after knight to c6, attacking the center again, we will look at two moves in this lecture. By far the most common move here is f4. This is totally keeping with white's plan. There is a move, it's been a little bit trendy, so you might see it more and more on the scene, f4, and I do just want to say here already there is a tremendous amount of choice for white. And this is the kind of thing that if you're playing this with the white pieces, you need to be ready for a lot of moves. The move I'm going to recommend, queen to b6, is in fact the most popular move, but also very popular is taking bishop to e7. f6 is a popular move. And one other very interesting try that is unique to this variation with the knight here blocking in the bishop is black can play this move b5. Objectively, I don't think b5 is correct if you have supercomputers and everything, so I'm not going to recommend it here. And I also just think we can get much sharper positions, which is what I'm looking for. But it is an interesting line that you could take a look at. A lot of good people have tried it. That being said, we are going to focus on the main move, queen to b6, immediately attacking that d4 pawn and seeing how white's going to respond. Of course, white is going to play knight to f3. And again, they need to be ready for capturing on d4. They need to be ready for bishop to e7. But I'm going to recommend just sticking with the main line here and playing the move f6. I like this idea. We're putting as much pressure on the center as possible, and we have the main idea of trading, and after they take back, throwing in this check, which can cause a lot of chaos, and then immediately capturing here before castling and trying to get some pressure on the knight. And we will divide this up into two parts. The main moves for white here are g3, trying to get this bishop out, sometimes to g2, but sometimes they even go to h3, which would attack the e6 pawn. And the other move that we're going to look at in our next game is a3, which just takes out the possibility of any bishop to b4 checks in the future. You can imagine after a trade on d4, we're trying to get this bishop check in really quick, get the pieces out very fast, and castling. With that in mind, we will look at a game with g3, and I always appreciate games that were played right here in St. Louis. So this is one from Ray Robson and Georg Meier. It was played in the Spice Cup in 2010, and it's absolutely fantastic, amazing stuff. So yeah, let's get into this one. This one's going to be really good. After c takes d4, this is our typical idea, they took back. In this game, actually, the move order went f takes e5, and only after the recapture was the check thrown in on b4. So we'll definitely come back to this. It kind of transposes to what we might see in our game anyway. However, there's something that I just simply need to share with you that I absolutely cannot believe. I'm going to step out of the frame here just so I can show you guys how incredible this actually is in this very, very position. In this position, you can tell I don't normally reveal all this stuff, but here's the database. You can see the main move here is bishop to b4 check. That's what I am recommending that you play, unlike the game, which was f takes e5. But check this out. After bishop to b4 check, this is the most amazing thing. I've never seen this. I have to share this with you guys. The proper way of defending against this check is to play knight to c3, and this is really the only move, and white is doing fine. However, if you look at this, 99 games, so this is most games in this database, almost 100 games. It's the Mega Base 2019. People are playing bishop to d2, and this move simply gets white into so much trouble. If you let it run, it should almost be losing. This is just horrible, and we've seen some really decent players have gone in for this, so we can notice some 2500s, 2400s have played this way, and I guess the rating does go down after that. But you're going to see this all the time. So the reason I'm recommending it is because, we will go through these lines, but this is just such a horrible way for white to play. It's a little trap. They might fall for this all the time, and you can already be minus 1.4, just absolutely crushing your opponents. So after this, check on b4, followed by blocking with the bishop, which is incorrect, and we're going to come back and look at knight to c3. I do just want to walk through a few of the lines because it can be complicated. It might not be super obvious why this is so winning for black, but a lot of it is centered around the fact that we do have sacrifices on the e5 square. So for example, after we capture, they're going to take back. And again, this is a situation where in the database, 63 people have taken with an f-pawn, and this is wrong. They should probably be taking with the d-pawn. And the reason for this is that we're not gaining a tempo when we castle attacking the knight. However, this also doesn't look that appealing either. Now we can play knight to c5, and after knight to c3, again, the only human move. It's been played 10 times, but it's just not the right move. One game went knight to e4, and already this is a super fantastic game for black. Just to give you some ideas, after knight to g5, queen e3 is one of the typical ideas with this pin. The idea is you can't block with the queen, or we're going to take this bishop with check, winning a piece. So bishop e2, castles, and black is in full control of this position. Not going to be easy for white to safely get that king anywhere, and the black attack is going to continue. So heading back now, after the check, I just want to show you guys one more time. The check, bishop to d2, question mark. We are looking for sacks on this square. So after the capture, most people are actually going to take with their f-pawn. Again, this is a mistake. It's not going to be easy, but life wasn't easy anyway. They took back castles, bishop to g2, and now this is the move that you need to know, the one that really brings it all together. It looks like white has kind of solved everything. White is ready to castle, and things are about to be fine for white. So this is your last chance to strike, and the way to do it is to sack on e5. And you can actually do it with either knight, but most commonly you're going to take with the knight on d7. After they recapture, we're going to take it back, and there are a couple different things that have been tried here. I know this is a bit theory dense, but I just want to point them out just so you can see all the ideas. You don't have to memorize all this, but kind of try to find some ideas, some patterns in the ways that people have done it. Now, the moves that people have tried are knight to f4. This seems to be a sensible move. You're blocking the potential of us winning a piece on f3. People have tried trading the bishop, and people have tried knight e to d4. That also defends the knight on f3, so sensible enough. And let's walk through a couple of these options. After knight to f4, again, we can throw in this typical move exploiting the pin, queen to e3. This is an excellent move. We're forcing the king to move. Again, you cannot block with the queen, or we are going to be able to win a piece. Here it's a little bit trickier because there's one extra piece we have to get rid of, but by getting rid of the knight, we are able to grab this guy, win a piece, and thus the game. So the king would have to move over to f1, and after the capture, there's going to be some problems on the f-file. You can imagine after some taking, some trading, there's going to be this move g5, problems on the f-file, and the white king is in a lot of danger. Heading back. One more time, I think it's kind of important to start from this position to have this fresh in your mind. After bishop to b4 check, we're hoping that they block with their bishop on d2 so that we can get this sack going on e5. So after the capture, they will take back. We're going to castle, and of course, after they protect their knight, we're going to sacrifice on e5. This is the main idea, letting our opening up the diagonal for our queen, letting our other knight jump into the game, and putting tremendous pressure on white before we ever had a chance to castle. And we had a quick look at knight to f4. So let's also look at this line, bishop to b4. This is a very interesting move. You get rid of one of the attacking pieces, and it's not so easy to see how black does it. I will give you one illustration, just so that we have a couple ideas in mind. After the capture, if they play king to f2, they're walking into that dangerous f-file. The way to exploit this is queen to e4, attacking that knight. And what people have tried in the past is knight to c3, attacking the queen. They are also bringing another defender to the knight, so they're trying to save their king. Feels like there should be something, and indeed there is. Maybe not that easy. You can pause if you want to test your attacking skills here. What would you guys play in this game? The best continuation is actually knight to d3, and after king to f1, another hard move to spot. Queen to c4, lining up with that king, not making it easy for that guy to go anywhere. And after a move like queen to e2, e5 promises black a very strong, powerful game. Heading back to this main position one last time, I do want to show you one more crazy variation. After the check on b4, if they block with their bishop, we're hoping they block with that bishop. We're going to take on e5, and after they take back, if we can attack that knight, we're going to attack that knight. When they defend it, we're going to pounce on e5. After the recapture, we're going to take back. And one last try that I will mention here is knight e to d4. This does indeed look to be a very sensible way, but there is a very nice move. And really, you only need to find one move here for black, and the rest is sort of easy. After knight to d3 check, we are forcing the king to go to e2. Already you can see that this king might get into a lot of danger. If the king ends up going to the f-file, the knight is going to be hanging. So he's got to go to e2, and the moves that have been played in human games are knight to b2, this wins, and queen to a6, this wins. But I do like the very cruel engine move that is suggested here, and that is e5. And this is just absolutely crushing. It's hard to move the knight away. If the knight moves away, perhaps our sneaky queen is going to get in here. And if this king is bold enough to take here, we can actually toss in this check, and anywhere the king goes, he's going to end up in a lot of trouble. For example, the computer wants you to go to c2, but after this capture, we have so many threats. We're probably going to actually win a piece. The computer wants to just start giving away material now, says it's absolutely lost. If you do take back here, we're just going to hit you with bishop to f5, and when you go back, we're bringing a rook in. All of our pieces come into the game. White is just in tremendous trouble, and we'll have no chance of saving this one. So with all that in mind, we will come back to our main position here. Again, in the game that we're going to look at, the Ray Robson versus Georg Meier game, f takes e5 was played, but we are going to have one more look at what could possibly happen after the check if they don't block with the bishop, but instead prefer to block with the knight. Now, if you just simply play f takes, which I do recommend, then after the capture, castling, we're going to head down the main path that we're going to see in the game. So something like this would be very normal, and we're going to check it out. However, I do want to, in this position, mention one other idea. I'm not recommending that this gets played, but I want to show it just so that you understand this one idea that white does have. If instead we castle, there is an idea of a3, bishop e7, and now bishop to h3. The idea of attacking this pawn. And black doesn't actually need to react to this immediately. You might think it's time to move this knight away. We need to get some defense here. But very often, again, we are so far up in development, we can actually sacrifice that e-pawn. And if they take the e-pawn, They might even greedily want to take this d pawn. I'm not going to get too deep into it. I don't want to bog everybody down. Oh, how's it going? Do you need help? Whew. All right. Whew. Sorry about that. Whew. Had to run up and down the stairs a few times. A little bit tired. Where were we? Something about not getting too bogged down in theory. I just want to highlight this idea of sacking this e-pawn after this capture on e5. Bishop takes e6. King h8. There's moves such as knight takes d5. I'm only going to show you this one line. I do apologize for being out of breath. I've been running up and down the stairs. Bishop takes d7. And you can get a position like this, which is actually fine for both sides. This is crazy, and this is possibly best play. What typically is going to happen is if you do sack this e-pawn, you can know that you always do have compensation. You are way up in development. So whatever happens, probably the consequences of opening the center are going to work out in black's favor. So we head back one last time. We are now going to enter the main line here of the actual game that was played. This was a g3 variation, and after c takes d4, c takes d4, f takes e5 was the move that was played, not throwing in the bishop check on b4 right away. So what happened was, only now did they play bishop to b4. I guess black is saying, I trust my opponent. I know that he's going to block with a knight and not with a bishop. So he's decided to play it in this move order. After knight to c3, black did castle. Again, we're attacking that knight. There's only one move here, and that's bishop to f4. If instead of bishop to f4, our opponent does play bishop to g2, we can now hit him with another sacrifice. We were threatening to take on f3 and exchange sack, and the idea is the center will now completely crumble. We snatch on d4, the e-pawn is hanging, and black has a tremendous attack. So that is the kind of thing that we are hoping for. So after black castled, white does in fact need to play bishop to f4. That being said, this is now one of those positions where, again, there are a lot of moves that have been played. Bishop to e7 is actually the most popular move, but I don't think it's the best. The move that we're going to show in the game has only happened 4 times out of 50-ish games that have reached this position. So the move, though, is so exciting once you see it. It's so insane. You're going to just love it. But I think it's the best move, and I think it actually is the only way for black to get an advantage here. And that is the move. Knight d takes e5. Absolute insanity. Then hanging the knight, it's the typical sacrifice that we're trying to make work, the same one we saw earlier. But this time, e5 was defended 3 times, but there's absolutely no way to take it without allowing the game continuation, which is probably a draw, but possibly white struggling, or an immediate collapse. For example, in the game, bishop takes e5 was played. If knight takes e5, we'll possibly transpose to the game after the capture if they take back with the bishop. We're going to reach the game. If they take back with a pawn, then we might see this remarkable move, d4, being played. And this is going to be really good for black. It is just worth pointing out that a3 is not a possibility here because we actually can take this knight. And if you snatch our bishop, you're going to get into a lot of trouble after we take on c2, rook to b1, and now queen to b4, which is more than just a simple check. It also threatens queen to e4, which would attack all of the rooks and cause a lot of damage to white. So this would not be possible, which is why we head back to our main game. After knight d takes e5, we saw the capture with the bishop, and after knight takes e5, we saw knight takes e5, and the main idea here, you have to find this idea as black, so let's just put this on the radar. Why do we sack all of our pieces? It's bishop takes c3 with the idea of bringing the queen to the b2 square. So after the capture, queen to b2 puts pressure on c3, it threatens a mate on f2, and this leads to a very, very forceful endgame where black is actually going to end up a pawn, but it's going to be a bishop versus knight where there's a good knight. So up a pawn, bad bishop versus good knight should probably be a draw with best play, and that's what we saw here. But let's check out how it happens. The only move here is actually queen to c1. You can imagine your opponents being frustrated in this position, not being able to work out all the consequences. If, for example, they decided to block the connection this way, they're going to get hit with queen to c3, and there's just simply no way to defend all of their stuff. So the absolute only move for white to play here is queen to c1, and now after the check, the king is going to be forced to move over. Again, we can play a very remarkable move if you haven't seen it. Queen takes f1, the idea being after the recapture, we're also going to be able to pick up the queen, and we enter this endgame. And still, it is worthy of study. This is move 21, but there are a couple games here that have been played. They're all ending in draws. After b6, the idea is after white tries to get his rook active, we need a way to trade off, neutralize that rook that's coming to the 7th rank, and the way to do that is rook to b7. In this game, they just decided to trade. We can count them up. Black is up a pawn, but obviously that knight on e5 does give white very good compensation. So even if your opponent does manage to find all the very best moves, this is the endgame that you're going to get. You're going to be up a pawn. With some chances, the computer will give some minus numbers about like how good black is doing, because it is a pawn after all. But in this game, there wasn't that much of a struggle. Black simply brought the king in, and they agreed to a draw pretty quickly. They didn't really put up too much of a fight. Not that you can really do anything. Neither side has a very constructive plan here. So a nice gentlemanly draw, and this is probably the best that white can hope for. So yeah, this is one of the variations that I do love, I do recommend. So hopefully you guys enjoy the G3 variation. And with that being said, we'll now move on and look at another game. So the second game that I want to show you guys is the game between David Baramidze and Mateusz Bartel, and this was played in Bundesliga in 2012. It started again with a French defense. We get our Steinitz variation after e5, and after knight f to d7, instead of the immediate knight c to e2, which is the variation that we're focusing on, this game began with f4, and only after c5 was knight c to e2 played. So this is just another way that white could possibly approach this opening, and we're going to respond the very same way with knight to c6. And after c3, defending that center in this game, queen to b6, attacking the d4 pawn, knight f3, and after f6, my recommended move, we're going to take a look at a3. a3 is a very sensible move. A lot of white players will prefer to play this way. It just simply gets rid of all the pesky theory that you're going to need to know. Black is trying to get this bishop to b4 check in there as soon as possible. This takes it away and also gives white the idea of forcing black to clarify. A move like b4 is going to put pressure on that c-pawn and just ask black to clarify what is going on in the center. So by all accounts, a very reasonable move. Now, with the pawn on a3, bishop has no better square than to go to e7. So bishop to e7 is what I would recommend. And now they are going to typically play the move b4. Instead of b4, I will point out this very aggressive move that white could also try, the move h4. And this is actually one of the variations that makes this famously popular for white. So perhaps some white players will have seen the game between Viswanathan Anand and Alexei Shirov, and this is sort of the famous one that put this on the map as a good way to play this as white. And the game continued with castling rook h3. This was the idea that Anand had in the game, doing a rook lift, bringing the rook into the attack. a5 was played just to prevent b4, and black would really love to be able to play the move a4, which is why white even took the time to prevent it with the move b3. And after queen to c7, I do like the black position, even though he didn't win in this game. Anand's idea was actually to reposition this knight, but after a4, b4, some captures here, black again went in for this sacrifice. And now your computer is going to love it and going to say this is fine for black. In the game, he actually had some struggles here coming up with the right plan. We have sacrificed, and we're actually going to pick up more material after this little tactic. The point being that if you capture, there's going to be this nice, nasty little check picking up a rook. So it was 3 pawns for a piece, and objectively that should be an equal amount of material. The game went on. White did end up winning this. It should be equal, but the pieces in this game actually did prevail. So this is the kind of line that you might run into. I've never seen anybody actually throw this h4 move out at me. I don't think you're going to find it a lot at the amateur level, but it is a move to keep in mind. And again, you're going to have to just play against the center and try to create as many problems there as we can for our opponents. So we head back now to our main game, and instead of the move h4, what was played in our game was b4. And this is asking us to clarify, so pretty much the only real way for us to do this is to take on d4. And after the pawn takes back in the game, we saw castles. And here we saw this idea again, the Anand idea, h4, white is going to try to be aggressive. But is white really ready for this kind of attack? I mean, don't you need to get some of your more pieces out? Black is doing well. We still have pressure on e5, and we have even more ways of creating pressure now that there's a pawn on b4. Black in this position asked some questions on the queen side with a strong move a5, and it's already white that is forced to answer some questions. And I think the only move, if you really have a look around, like you're going to lose this pawn, right, is to try this tricky move b5, a pawn sack, inviting the queen in. And a lot of players, for some reason, have not taken that pawn. But in this game, black took on b5, and after the knight moved away, has to retreat to b6. So white is now sacked a pawn just to be able to liberate his position. He's got to get some pieces out. And the question becomes, will white get a huge kingside attack, or will black be able to consolidate? He is a pawn up, has a little bit less space. Is black going to be able to get all the pieces out, or is black going to be cramped and suffer a painful death? That's the question. The game continued, rook b1, asking the queen to move even farther away from the queen side, and now bishop to d3. Black in this game played the move h6. Possibly it was a little bit stronger to take here, one idea being that you're forcing white to make a decision on how to capture. If they do capture this way, it does give your knight access to the c5 square. But in this game, h6 was played, and now knight to b5. The knight gets hopping on the queen side. That b5 square was a weakness. You might as well put a knight there, and potentially you can hop into the d6 square in the future. After knight to a7, just trying to get rid of that pesky knight, white played the amazing move, knight to g5, hanging the knight. What's going on? Black did indeed capture, so you can see we're going to get this crazy, chaotic mess where it really is white going in for the all-out attack. Black should decide to simplify here, played the correct move, taking on b5, trying to get as much of that material off the board as possible. And white played the seemingly most logical move in the position, taking on h6. Certainly that looks the scariest, but is in fact not the correct move, possibly overlooking black's very next move. Probably better was taking this knight in one way or another, possibly taking with the rook, because taking here immediately does let black play. You can pause your video if you haven't found it. Check. Bishop to b4 check, forcing the king to move, and only now playing the move knight to c3, winning some material. And very possibly after queen to g4, white did not anticipate, or at least didn't fully calculate correctly, the move queen to g5, trying to get those queens off. It's probably time to play something like rook takes h4, but white went in for the greedy queen to e6 and actually got himself into quite a lot of trouble here. After the capture on g7, black took back with the king, and now after the move f5, we could have seen a remarkable combination by black, but a very possibly beautiful win was missed here. It's not easy to blame these guys. This is a very hard continuation to find. A possible winning move here was queen to g3, threatening mate, yes, of course, but after bishop to e3, we could have played our favorite sacrifice in this position, knight takes e5. That would have been a fantastic move. Obviously, white doesn't want to trade the queens. If we take here, black could move the king away, and so I think that's what the crazy computer wants to do, but trading the queens would get the job done there. Also, we have revealed an attack on the queen, so the queen really has to go somewhere. Let's assume they would want to go to h6. I feel like that's the most natural move. After we go back, again, they are in quite a lot of trouble. If, for example, they just took this knight, we're going to crash through on the f-file. It's not going to be a pretty story here for white. Coming back to this decision after f5, in the game, we saw the move queen to h5, which did allow the very strong move g4. And after the capture, toss in the move queen to h6. black played the move king to f7, queen to e6, and it's looking like we should see a draw here. However, after king to g8, white finally makes the last blunder of the game and plays the move rook takes h4. I think this is supernatural. A lot of people would have played it, but the only move that actually did save the day, I don't know if you can find it. If you want to try to find it for white, if you want to try to defend this position, go ahead. The only move that saves the day is rook to b2, getting that rook onto the second rank, defending and preventing the knight from capturing on b1. So a difficult move to find, and which is why we saw a very logical move. This is towards the end of the game, so potentially there was a lot of time trouble here as well. And this just allows the nice little combo. Rook takes f5, and after bishop takes, not taking the bishop, but instead queen to f3. And here, facing mate in 3, white did resign the game. So that is just one way of handling this opening. If they play a3, again, the idea is to just develop that bishop to e7 and get castled. They're going to play b4. We're going to have to trade. We're going to castle, and it's all about getting pressure either on the queen side, or if they don't play h4 and they play something else, we might be able to get pressure against the center, always looking for sacrifices on e5. And one last game I do want to share with you guys is a game that was also played in St. Louis, another Ray Robson game. This is the game between Ray Robson and Fabiano Caruana that was played in St. Louis right here at the U.S. Championship in 2017. So let's jump in and take a look at how Fabi plays the French defense. After e4, e6, d4, d5, we get our Steinitz variation here. And after knight c to e2, c5, I did mention that in this position, instead of f4, by far the main move, some people do prefer this move, knight to f3. And they're just saying, maybe I don't actually have time to get that move f4 in. I'm just going to harmoniously develop my pieces and again, choose between a pattern of either playing g3 next and developing the bishop, or playing a3 and playing the same way, but without wasting a turn on f4. I want to get developed. I want to prioritize castling, and I have all the time in the world to do these things. Now, of course, again, there are many, many, many options for black. White really needs to be prepared, which is why it's not so easy to imagine many white players at a certain level going in for a continuation like this. But queen to b6, again, is very logical, and I will show it in just a minute and kind of show you why I think with the knight on f3, since white has saved this time, it doesn't quite give you the advantage that it does in the f4 line. But there's bishop e7, again, there's capturing f6, and again, there's this clever little b5 move. Fabi played a move that is totally different. He played the move queen to a5, so we're going to come back and take a look at this, pinning this pawn, which already directly threatens to capture on d4. The main problem, I guess it's not really a problem, but the main deterrent for me, the reason that I don't want to play queen to b6 in this line, and of course you can, we'll just have a quick run through it. They can play either a3 or g3. If they play g3, you're going to get a position that's very similar to the previous variations that we've looked at. Again, you can imagine f6 happening, and there's probably going to be a capture. This is a very typical French position, so many French players might be right at home here. But it will be a different style of play. Black will be trying to fight for control of that e5 square. It's not so easy to possibly get control, but it's a typical French structure, so if you do like playing this structure, you can definitely go ahead and give this a try. Instead of g3 after queen to b6, many people might play a3. Again, this is the idea of preventing that bishop to b4 check. So once b4 is no longer an option for the bishop, usually e7 is the better square. And after g3 castles, bishop g2, f6, we're going to get a very similar structure. So again, if you're comfortable in these structures, feel free to play this. I only want to offer this Fabi game as a possible alternative for those that are interested in trying something a little bit fancy against this move, knight to f3. So we see queen to a5. Really, really weird stuff. What is this all about? And it actually does threaten to just take here, because if you can't take back with a pawn, the e-pawn is going to be weak, and we're going to be able to win a pawn here. So what ended up happening in the game was the move a3. This is very logical. In this exact variation too, again, we don't have time for a move like g3 because black did actually make a concrete threat. We're going to capture, and if you take back, we are going to pick up a pawn. Coming back to a3 here. In this game, Fabi now decided to take, And after b4, this was kind of the cunning point. You're forcing the queen to go back. I love what happened in this game. He retreats, and after the capture, what do you guys think the plan is here with black? It's actually quite remarkable. And the way the game turned out was black just won a pawn over there on the queen side. He just took it, and then he won the game. It was like so easy, bread and butter. He starts with the move b5, and the idea is to just follow it up with a5 and take that b-pawn. That's exactly what happened. Knight to f4 was played. This attacks the pawn and brings the knight to a very scary square. These knights, we do have to be careful when black inevitably does want to castle. We're going to have a lot of knights to have to deal with. Perhaps these knights can start thinking of hopping around, causing all sorts of chaos. But in the game, Ray Robson actually played a little bit too slow and gets punished for it. Queen to b6, rook to b1, a5. And yeah, after this capture, black took back with a rook, which may appear a little weird, a little unorthodox, but he simply is going to be going for this pawn. And the way he's going to do it after bishop to d3 is with the move bishop to a6. And castles, he just took that pawn. And it's just easy as that. You take the pawn. Okay, it's not quite that simple. There are a lot of crazy computer lines that we need to analyze here. But Ray Robson already made a mistake, and Fabi never lets him off the hook after this move. In the game, bishop to e3 was tried. It seems logical, just keeping the bishop on the board, and white is hoping maybe black will castle, maybe I'll get this huge attack, but it's actually just a little bit too slow. And I want to illustrate it by pointing out a few of the computer lines in this position. The funny line is actually bishop takes a3. This was the first recommendation by the computer. And now after the capture, queen c1 is actually the only move after we move the rook back, knight to h5. This attacks the g-pawn, but there's this amazing computer move. I don't know if this happened on the board, if this was on Fabi's radar. I've never seen this idea before. The computer actually just says h6, ignores the threat. If you take here, we can pop up. And it actually makes a lot of sense. We've now found a way to connect our rook and have a very safe king. And it's actually white that needs to find a very, very forcing series of moves. Rook to a1 is like the only move. And yeah, after the captures, we're going to pick up some material here. And yeah, computer says everything's fine. This would be the normal continuation. But I just love that move h6. That's just so crazy. And makes a lot of sense. Let him take on g7. Don't worry about the pawn. Just connect all your pieces and remind white that the center is also under a lot of fire. But heading back here one more time, another possibility that I think seems a little bit more realistic for humans would be this move, knight to g5. This is making a lot of threats. We are thinking of sacrifices on e6, on f7. We're thinking of bringing the queen into h5. So black's really never going to be able to play a move like h6 or something. It's going to be very dicey, and probably has to play the move g6 just to solidify a lot of those squares. Particularly, we're keeping that queen out of h5. And this would, to my mind, this would be sort of the normal continuation. Computer says 0, 0, 0. Nothing's going on. There's no big deal. Black's up a pawn, but white does have a lot of pressure on the king side. And this could have been an interesting way for the game to have continued. So after this move, bishop to e3, which was played in the game, I like Fabi's move. There's one move here that will give black an advantage, and that is the nice move, bishop to e7, preventing that white knight from jumping into either of these squares. And he played the move queen to d2. He needs to find something a lot more direct. He just wasn't able to find it. The only real try in this position would have been knight to h5. This direct move does ask black a lot of questions. And if black decides now to castle, he could play this remarkable move. I think probably he may have missed this one. Knight to h4. Absolutely crazy. Offering the knight with the idea that if you take it back, there's queen to g4, attacking the bishop and the g-pawn. I don't know if he saw this one directly or what, but yeah, after a continuation like this, it's crazy. Black, again, should be able to defend this in a lot of the lines. Queen is coming back to the defense here, but yeah, this would have made it a little bit more of an interesting game. As it were, in the game, queen to d2 was played, and I like this g6 move. Fabi simply sees all the threats that white should be doing and now has taken away all the squares from the knights. Now, this knight can't hop here. This knight can't hop in to either of these squares, and he's just simply taking away all of the counterplay his opponent has, and he's up a pawn. So the game continued. Rook to c1, and now b4, offering a trade of pieces. White tries this move h4, doesn't really make a threat, so rook to a3 was played. We saw a capture of the bishops. Knight h3. It's not entirely clear to me what white is trying to achieve over there on the king side. Fabi just simply continued. Knight to a5, and after bishop to g5, this was probably a miscalculation. It was already bad for white, but this didn't help because now knight to b3. So presumably Ray was sacking in exchange, realizing he was kind of in a desperate position, but now after the capture, he took back and he tries this move, queen to e2. A very clever move. It looks at first sight like perhaps Ray has blundered his queen, but no, in fact, this would lead to a mate in 2 after the simple continuation. Rook to c8, rook to d8, checkmate. So a clever little move. Fabi did not fall for it. He played the move, queen to a8, and after queen to b5, now played a nice move, rook to c3, offering a trade of rooks. Trading the rooks would only advance the pawn, and that's exactly what happened. And again, after this capture, one more little accuracy. You might be tempted to take here right away, but then white will be able to check and pick up this pawn. So instead, after bishop to e7, queen to a1 happened in the game. King had to move, and now when we recapture, we have defended our c-pawn, so things are looking excellent for Fabi. And yeah, some checks were played, and again, Fabi played super accurate. Rook to f8, and only now pushing the pawn, making another queen. So it's not going to end well for Ray, unfortunately. I do like Ray quite a bit. He lives here in St. Louis, but in this position, he did have to resign. So that concludes part 2 of the Steinitz variation of the Feisty French. I hope you guys did enjoy that. Part 3 will be coming out very soon. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, share it around, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already, and I'll see you guys next time for part 3.